Hi, everybody. I'm author Douglas A. Burton, and joining me tonight is an artist, a painter, a Hollywood matte painter by the name of Eric Chauvin, and here he is tonight. Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm good, Doug. How about yourself?
I'm hanging in there. Excited to talk with you tonight. There's several things that we can cover, and you have an illustrious career in Hollywood where you've been involved in many movies. We'll cover that, and also some stories and how you got into your chosen craft, and some of the difficulties in your process, things like that. And then the second half of the conversation, I would like to get into four paintings in particular that cover the Byzantine Empire, the paintings that have been done with such excellence and detail that it'd be really fun to discuss those in detail. So,
Okay.
All right. So first off, do you want to tell everyone who you are and maybe give us a little summary of your career before we dig a little deeper?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Southern California in Orange County, and went to Cal State Fullerton. And I'm glad we have time here because it's kind of a long, rambling story.
But, perfect.
So I always had an aptitude for art when I was in grade school, and when I went to college, I really wanted to get into film. That was, when I was a kid, I made films as well as doing paintings and drawings and things. And so when I was doing my general ed classes, the first couple of years I was there, I didn't really I knew I was going to be an art major, but I really wanted to have it more tailored towards film. And but when it came time to actually picking a major, I just decided to get a fine art major and majoring with this emphasis on drawing and painting. And so that's what I did. And most people who get that degree usually go into being a gallery artist, someone who makes nice paintings. They have a gallery that sells their work, and life is good. Most people don't actually make a living doing that, though. And I was more interested in doing more commercial oriented work. And so when I graduated, I couldn't get a job anywhere doing any kind of art at all. I mean, I even applied. There was this is back in the mid 80s. There was a place, it was called the Thomas Guide Maps. It was just this map you carry in your car. And instead of having GPS, this is pre-GPS, you would go to the Thomas Guide, and that's how you navigate to where it was you wanted to go in a particular area. And they had an ad in the paper for like a paste up artist. I applied for that, had a college degree, and they didn't even call me for an interview. It's like I had no kind of art opportunities at all. So I ended up working for a mortgage company, and started in the mailroom and ended up in human resources. And I absolutely hated it. I mean, I was okay at it. I mean, it was the one good thing about it is that's where I learned how to use a computer, because we were using what was it? It was like a 286, I think, IBM. And so I got really good at working in Lotus. It was a
I remember Lotus
database program. And so I got to a point where I would actually, if I had free time, I would write these programs in Lotus. And I'm not a programmer, but it was like you can use their macros to automate things. And I thought that was actually kind of fun. But I hated the job because I had to wear a tie and a suit, and it was all just completely analytical, which is completely not what I'm good at. And by now I had gotten married. And so I just came home one day and told my wife, I said, this job's killing me. I want to go back to school and see if I can, kind of jumpstart me getting into something that's art related. And so I went back to graduate school at the same place, Cal State Fullerton. But by then I decided what I wanted to focus on was being a matte painter, because that was it was a nice marriage of film and art. And I figured that if I could be a good matte painter, I could just be a good painter, because the whole idea of matte painting is you want to paint something so convincing that when people are seeing a matte painting in a movie or a TV show, they just assume it's real. And realism is something I've always been attracted to in art. And so I figured that would be like the perfect thing to pursue. Well, my school didn't have they didn't even know what matte painting was, let alone have any kind of a curriculum that would tailor to that. So they allowed me to sort of create my own curriculum for me to be able to take classes that I thought would be beneficial to me if I wanted to pursue that field. And so that's what I did. So I spent the next 2 years getting my master's degree. And in that time, I had a professor who was my advisor as well. And this was over 30 years ago. We still talk on the phone like once a month. We're still,
Oh, wow.
After all these years. At this point, I've probably known him over 40 years. His name's Don Lagerberg. And he is somebody who we have the same, we love pop culture. We love movies. We love, in his case, he loves comic books. I never really got into that, but I don't think that art should necessarily be on a pedestal. I think good art, it doesn't matter how it's created or what it was created for. If it's something that's really, it really grabs your attention, that to me, that's like what it's supposed to do. So if it was made for commercial purposes, it doesn't really matter. And so, and he feels the same way. And
right.
So he was really my cheerleader when I was in graduate school. And at the same time, he was showing in a gallery in Los Angeles, and there was a fellow that came in that saw his work and just loved it. And so he left a message with the gallery owner that left his name and phone number and wanted Don to give him a call. So he did. And this fellow that came in, his name was Sean Joyce, and he was a matte painter at ILM. But he grew up in LA. I think he was in between shows. And so he was back in LA, and he happened to see Don's work. Well, anyway, through Don, I got to meet Sean. And so when I was in graduate school, Sean was sort of my critiquer. I would do these like fake matte paintings just to have something for my gallery show that obviously weren't for any real movies or anything, but I wanted to be able to kind of develop my chops so that once I graduated, hopefully I would get a job somewhere doing this kind of work. And so I picked different images that would be like something that was very jungly or something that was very urban and something that was daytime and nighttime, because I wanted to cover all the bases so that I'd have a nice portfolio that I can be able to take, and hopefully someone would want to take a chance on me. Well, when I graduated, Sean had been contacted by ILM to come back to work there on Steven Spielberg's Hook. This is 1991. And he was busy on something else, but he'd mentioned it to Don, who mentioned it to me. And so he gave me the contact information of who to talk to at ILM. So I'm in Southern California, and ILM is up in the Bay Area, in the San Francisco Bay Area in Marin. At least they were in Marin then. So I got a hold of the fellow that was in charge of the matte department. His name was Bruce Walters. And he was very nice. And he says, well, if you're ever up this way, let me know and I'll give you a tour of the facility. So I was up there the next weekend. I took the train up and he showed me around, and I brought my couple of my paintings with me just so they can be able to see it firsthand.
Right.
And so this is before we actually started on Hook. Oh, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. This is a very old memory. This is like 35 years ago. It wasn't for Hook. They asked Sean to work on the Doors movie. That's what it was. The Doors movie. With the I forgot who did that. Oliver Stone
and Val Kilmer, and
yeah, exactly. So he wasn't able to do that. So when I contacted Bruce, it was to see if I could get working on that. And so when I talked with Bruce, he says, "Well, we already have people here that are working on it, but if you want to come up, I'll give you a tour." Yada yada. So he gave me the tour, and he says, "Well, we don't really have anything that we can offer you right now, but we're bidding on this Spielberg movie called Hook. And if we get it, there'll be money in it for a matte painting assistant, and we can hire you as an assistant." I says, "Well, that would be fantastic." Well, like 6 months goes by. It was a really long time, but I was still in school at this point, so it actually worked out fine. I didn't want to leave early because I wanted to graduate. It just so happened that the week after my graduation ceremony, I was at ILM working on Hook, and so I was there for 6 months.
Wow.
And at that time, everything was done the old-fashioned way. It was actual real paint on real glass and shot with a real camera. And so that was amazing, because I worked with, to this day, I still am I'm in awe of the people that I work with in terms of their talent. And so I always say I learned more in that 6 months at ILM than I did in the 5 years or more I spent in art school, because these are guys are like, here's how you do this and do it quickly and make it look really cool, and It's just like these professional tips. And so I was there for 6 months. And then when the show wrapped, I went back down to Southern California. And then I freelanced working on a couple of TV things. One was a TV movie, and another was I did a painting for a physical painting for an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And that was actually really cool because it was the episode that Scotty was in. So I got to meet James Doohan.
Oh, awesome.
It was really cool. Yeah. Yeah, actually, they shot it at Paramount, and I was in Orange County, so LA wasn't too far away from where I lived. And so the supervisor gave me a tour of the stages, and so it was really cool. I got to meet Patrick Stewart and LeVar Burton.
Oh, wow.
But they were talking with James Doohan, so it was really cool to meet him, before he obviously passed away. But
Right.
So that was cool. But not too long after that, I got a call from Bruce at ILM asking if I was available to come back up to work on Young Indiana Jones, the TV show. And so I didn't have anything going on. So yeah, it was supposed to be a 5-week deal, and I was there for the next 3 years. And
Wow.
But at that time, it was about a year from the time that I left ILM to the time that I came back to work on Young Indy. And at that time, the Matt department had transitioned to working digitally. And so when I came back, I had to learn Photoshop. And it's like, well, I kind of dabbled with it a bit in college, but I don't really know. That's okay. The guy who wrote it works for us. He can teach you how to use it.
What?
That was John Knoll. And I think now John is like the head of like Lucasfilm or something. He's high up on the food chain, but he and his brother actually wrote Photoshop back in the 80s. Yeah. So I went back to ILM. After about a year of working freelance in Southern California, and that's where I learned Photoshop. ILM had gone from working in traditional media to working digitally in that time, and so the only thing they were really using in the Matt department was Photoshop. We weren't doing any kind of compositing or 3D work or anything like that. So. But we were kind of like learning it as we go, which was really cool because it was a new frontier. No one had been working this way before.
Well, do you know, I just happened to watch, have you heard of Light and Magic? It's a documentary series. It's on Disney Plus. Have you heard of it?
I might have. Yeah, I can't remember. I don't have Disney Plus, but I think I can't remember. I think I probably have seen it. Was it a few years ago?
It was maybe 2 years ago. But I didn't want to take up too much time here, but they just released what's called season 2 of this documentary, and they focus on ILM in the 90s and the transition from practical to digital, to where George Lucas himself literally had it in his head. We can become a full digital studio. And in this documentary, they spent a good amount of time saying it was just too cost prohibitive. So what they did, one of their solutions was to figure out how to use personal computers and to use some of the off-the-shelf software to fast track some of the digital work. And they said that was actually a huge step forward because it economized one section of this digital, work space and pipeline and allowed them to focus on the bigger projects here. So it's interesting hearing you say that because I just heard an extensive discussion about this transition to digital using personal computers and off-the-shelf software.
Yeah, I had a computer when I lived in Southern California, but it was a PC. And when I came back to work on Young Indy, they were working on Macintoshes, and I'd never really worked on a Macintosh before. But I think at the time, by then, Adobe had already bought Photoshop, and I think it was only available on the Mac at that time. This was the late 80s, early 90s. And so so I not only learned Photoshop, but I learned how to use a Mac, and I still use both today, almost 35 years later.
Wow.
But yeah, they actually started a department. So the computer, we called it the CG department, computer graphics. And when I was there the first time, it was there, but it was very fledgling. I think it was just like maybe half a dozen people. And but that was sort of spun off from when Pixar was part of ILM. Pixar went off to become their own thing. Actually, I think Steve Jobs actually bought Pixar from George Lucas, but it was from Pixar that they actually kind of dipped their toe in the whole creating visual effects digitally pond. And
Oh yeah.
because I can remember when I was working on Young Indy, that's when we were working on Jurassic Park. And there was a big discussion about, originally they were going to do the dinosaurs as stop motion, hiring Phil Tippett to actually puppeteer them. And but then the CG department had done a demo where they animated a T-Rex all digitally, and they showed it to Steven. He's like, well, this is how we have to do the movie.
Yeah.
So, so what they ended up doing was a compromise. They still hired Phil to puppeteer, but they made this mechanism they called it a DID. It was a dinosaur interface device. And so what it was like a ball jointed rig that he would be normally used to animating with the skin over it, but it was just the skeleton, but it had all these sensors in it. And so if he moved an arm or a leg, there would be a sensor that would tell him how much it was moved. And then that would go to like a spreadsheet in a computer. And then they would just apply that to the digital model. So he was actually creating all the animation with a physical thing. And then they would take that. It was like motion capture before motion capture. It was like,
wow.
It was stop motion capture.
I have an image of it. Let me pull this up here. Okay. Does that look familiar?
Yep, that's it. Yeah.
DID, which like you said is dinosaur input device or digital input device.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is a little bit of a hybrid. It allows them to do a little bit of computer-aided graphics with also some physical, practical aspects to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can see, looking at it, that there's sensors for everything. It looks like, including the different sections of his tail. So they were able to capture quite a bit of data from this thing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I never actually saw, him at work with this, but it must have been pretty cool to see.
It must have been really awesome.
Yeah, and again, this was before they did, actual motion capture. So it was kind of a cool sort of hybridization between the old way of working and what would become the normal way of working, with everything being strictly digital. But when I was in the math department, we were mostly working in just Photoshop. But then, so I had worked on the next generation of Star Trek, and then I moved to the Bay Area, but I still had my contacts for the people I worked with in LA. And so one of the fellows that I worked with on Star Trek got a job working on Babylon 5.
Oh, great show.
And so my day job was working at ILM, and I wasn't working on just Young Indy. I worked on a bunch of things while I was there. But at night I'd come home and I'd work on Babylon 5, and I was actually making more money doing that. So, but it was pretty cool. The guys at Babylon 5 were like really great to work with. They pretty much left me alone. I rarely got notes. They would take things the first time, but it was fun because I mostly designed my own shots, and that was kind of cool. And back then everything was standard def, so it was pretty small. But it got to a point where there was this one location called the Zen Garden, and I did this painting I didn't do the pilot for that show, but I worked on the first episode after the pilot, and then from that point on. And there's this location called the Zen Garden, and so I did an actual full, complete painting, where it's literally just doing the whole thing in Photoshop. And because I thought it was a one-off, but then that location came up again a couple of episodes later, and I thought, if I built this in 3D, it would save me an awful lot of time. And so I ended up buying a program called Infinity, and it was my first foray into 3D. And so I had learned how to use that, at least enough that I can be able to utilize that to create 3D elements for paintings for Babylon 5. And then I carried that over I was still working on Next Generation digitally as well. And but then I was working, I think it was on The Mask. It was the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask. And there's a shot that I did. I think the story takes place in a fictional town called Edge City. And so I did a painting of the city from looking at it from like the ocean. or the coastline, looking at this big, disgusting, overbuilt city, and most of it was photographic. We were in Marin, so I think I went to San Francisco and just took a bunch of reference photos that I collaged together in Photoshop. But they wanted to have this like sewer drain that came out of the bluff that would dump this sludge into the water. And so I thought, okay, I'll just build that in 3D. And so I did. And so I took my copy of Infinity with me on my little 3.5-inch floppy and just loaded it up on my computer at ILM, and everything was fine. But the other guys in the room, the matte painters there with me, were like, hey, that's pretty cool. And so I started installing it on everybody else's computers, and so they can be able to play with 3D as well. Well, after, I don't know, a month or two, the guys at ILM says, we're technically pirating this, so I think we should all actually own copies. And well, that's fine. So they got like legitimate copies of it. But John Knoll was actually, there was 2 applications that he was using just for his own stuff that he really got good at. And for modeling, it was Form Z. And then for rendering, it was this program called Electric Image. And so eventually we all kind of migrated over to those programs. And so I went from Infinity to Form Z. But Form Z at that time didn't really have a renderer. So what you do is you take your models from Form Z and you export them to Electric Image, and that's where you map them and light them and render them and animate them and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so a 2-step process.
Right, with 2 different applications. And so so I got, good enough with both of those. And so, at this point I've worked on, I don't know, a bunch of movies and this, now we're looking at 1995. I came back at the end of 92, and now it's 95.
Well, that's a big jump, because, the difference between 1991, 92 and 1995 is really post Jurassic Park, post CGI. Now CGI has been made, the new system, the new world order, right? In the art departments around the Hollywood studios. Is that right?
Yeah. In fact, I remember we went out to lunch with, I think it was with, John Ellis. He became like the department supervisor at some point during that time. And he took us out to lunch, and he says, well, the reason why we're out having lunch right now is I need to find out can you see a situation where we need to keep all the old art stuff, like the easels and the glass panels and all this stuff? Do you ever foresee a situation where that would be the best way to make a matte painting? And by now we were pretty ingrained in working digitally, and we're all like, no, I can't think of one. And so that's when they got rid of all their art stuff. They repurposed those rooms and just turned them into workstations. People working at workstations. We used to be right. We were working at the back end of what was called D building. That was ILM started in LA, but when they moved to Marin, D building is where Empire Strikes Back was made, basically, at least all the visual effects stuff. And so the very back was the matte department when I was there, upstairs. So they just turned it into more workstations. And so by 1995, again, I'd been moonlighting and making, better money doing that. And so my wife and we were actually renting a house. We were sharing it with another friend of mine. We actually met at ILM, Ian McCaig, and his name will come up in the future. But he was in the art department there. And Ian, if you look him up, is an extraordinary artist. He and is also just a really super nice guy. So, but he later on, he ended up designing Darth Maul. That was one of his creations.
He designed Darth Maul?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay.
So Ian and I, we were actually sharing a studio when we had this house together. And at the time, his kids were really young, and we hadn't started our family yet. So it was me and my wife. We had a bedroom and a bathroom on the 3rd floor. Our studio was on the 2nd floor with their bedroom. And then the bottom floor was the kids' bedrooms, and then also the living space, the living room and kitchen and all that. And so we lived together for almost 3 years, and then got to a point where we wanted to be able to get our own house. And I'd saved some money for that. But even back then, yeah, there's Ian.
There's a picture of Ian.
Yeah.
So real quick, I'll just jump in here. We had a discuss. Me and a couple other people on YouTube were having a discussion because lately the prequels have been aging really well all of a sudden. You probably heard the news, Revenge of the Sith came in second at the box office. I mean, it was pulling like legitimate numbers as if this was commercially viable today, even though it's, 20 years old. And we were having a discussion on the cultural relevance, and we found that there are a bunch of things in the prequels that have lasted in culture. And one of the first examples we landed on was Darth Maul. I'm like, he was only in one movie technically, but everyone knows what he looks like. He's iconic. And, that has stood the test of time, that one design,
Well, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's cool for, it's cool to be involved in something that actually becomes iconic. I've had a few shots I've worked on in my career that have become iconic. And so it's kind of cool to be able to say, that's mine. So when people think back, it's like, well, that's my shot.
Wow.
So that's kind of fun. Even if they don't know who did it, just the fact that, I did something that is part of culture is really cool. So
that matters. We discuss this on my channel because one way of measuring some of these shows are staying power. What stays with you? What images you summon up at will that you put rent free in everybody's head because it's such a good job. Scenes and dialogue. The good stuff lasts. So anyway, it's interesting to hear you say that, and that must be very special for you.
Yeah, and like I said, even if no one knows who did it, it's just that personal satisfaction of knowing that you did something that will outlast you. I'll die, but hopefully these shows will still, be seen by future generations. And it's nice to know that you had a small part in that. So
yes, absolutely. Are there images you would like me to share now, or do you want to wait till we get to those points?
Well, I can probably mention them. I don't know if you can find them quickly, but it's always cool when you do like the last shot of a TV season. It's like the cliffhanger, image.
Yeah.
And so I did that a couple of times, one on the X-Files and the other one on Lost. And so it was kind of cool to have done like these last shots for people to go, oh my God, what's going to happen next season when they start? And so for X-Files, it was an overhead shot looking down on a half submerged UFO on a beach. And you see, who's the girl? Is that
Scully?
Is that the girl or the guy? I never watched the X-Files. So.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not a huge X-Files. Like, I don't know it that well.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm trying to find the image. Is it a beach?
Yeah, it's a beach.
Ooh, I might have found it here. Tell me if this is it. This isn't a high res image, but I can try to. Tell me if this is it. Hold on a second. Save image. Biogenesis, it's titled. Image file.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay, we got it.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun. So that was I think that was the end of a season. So they had to wait to see what happened with that. But
that's a cool shot too, by the way.
Yeah, and there's a little fun fact. That's actually not what's her name? It's not really Gillian Anderson. It's her photo double.
Oh,
yeah. They shot this at Leo Carrillo Beach, and it was really the effects supervisor had asked me to come out to be on set to supervise this since I was going to be doing the shot. And so I was actually in Louisiana with family at the time, and so I flew back early so I could be there. And I went out to the beach. I was there all day, and the shot never came up. And then the next day, it was like super windy, and so they didn't do any shooting. And so it wasn't until the next day after that, at the very end of the day, that they finally that this shot came up on the schedule. And so then it was like, hurry up, let's get going. Come on. And so I'm like, Jesus, guys, you didn't give me a chance to so this was on a big jib arm, and they built this big platform up on a rock looking down. And the director said, if you get and this isn't a knock on Jillian at all. And but they said, if you want Jillian for the shot, she will do one take. If you want to have multiple takes, use her photo double. They look exactly alike anyway. I said, well, let's do the photo double. I mean,
especially from the aerial.
Exactly, because it was a big camera move. It kind of comes up and kind of turns. And so I just wanted to make sure that we weren't just like stuck with just one take if it wasn't going to be the best. So So yeah, this I forget what this is like in the late 90s, I think, early 2000s. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it was fun because I didn't build the ship. That was actually an asset that was given to me, but I had to composite it in there, and I did like a 2D animation to make it look like ripples, and then I made the foam around the edge, and then I animated the bird shadow going across.
Oh yeah,
And
great
so
touch.
yeah, so it was kind of fun. So that was that, and then for I think it was at the end of season 1 or 2 of Lost was the shot where they find the hatch, in Lost, and it's when they open the hatch. I think it's Locke and who's the doctor on that? I forget his character's name.
Matthew Fox's character.
Yeah, I forget his character's name. But anyway, they're like looking down on the hatch, and so we're looking up at them, and the camera pulls back, and we see that shaft, and then it fades out to the end of the season. That was one of my shots too. Oh, yep, that's the one right there.
Yeah.
But so technically, yeah, this is mine. So the only thing we kept was they actually built a shaft, but it only was just a little bit of a lip, and they wanted to have the camera pull back, and so I ended up just replacing everything with a matte painting. It was a 3D matte painting because of the camera move. But if you got near the end of the shot, you would see more of the shaft. This is like the beginning of the shot. As it pulls back, you see more of it come into play. But it was still, that was another one was kind of cool to do that. And even before I did this, I just remembered I worked on a movie. It was a Rob Reiner film called The American President. And this is when I was still at ILM. And so I did the last shot in that too, which I think took place in, is it the Senate? I can't remember if it's like the Senate chambers or if it's the House, but it's one of those chambers that they give like the State of the Union, speeches at.
Right.
And that was, they had a set that they built of people, behind the, where the seating would be, but all of the inside of the room was actually a matte painting. I didn't do the compositing of that, but I did the painting for that. And that was the last shot in that show. So that was kind of cool.
And then, I'm just going to tell people, just in case, very briefly, what a matte painting is. So a matte painting is a very photorealistic painting onto glass, and it's meant to merge with actual footage. In fact, I remember the first time I learned what a matte painting was watching a documentary about A New Hope. And this image right here of Obi-Wan Kenobi he's turning off the tractor beam. There's an actual set that was built. Let me see. I think I have a picture of there's an actual set that was built for Obi-Wan Kenobi to stand on. Here, this actually gives a little bit of a composite. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, it's just a studio room. They just built this one part. And then the matte painting, the matte artist will paint the image you see on the upper right, which is the continuation of the image photorealistically onto glass to create the illusion that Obi-Wan Kenobi is essentially standing over a bottomless pit on the Death Star. And when you see the image in a movie, a lot of times these images can wow you because you would never be able to build a set. There's no guardrails. The Empire wasn't too concerned about safety. So, the matte painting can create these stunning images onto glass. And there's a ton of these in the Star Wars, original Star Wars trilogy. And as Eric is explaining, there's a lot of these in a lot of shows that you probably never knew that you were looking at a painting. So anyway, this is what a matte painting is. This is one of the things that Eric does professionally.
Yeah, and there's actually there's a fellow that worked at ILM before I was there, named Craig Barron, and years later he wrote a book called The Invisible Art, and it was all about matte painting. And I love that title because that really is a great description of what matte painting is. The whole point of a painting is to not stand out. You don't want people to go, wow, that's a great matte painting. You want people just to be lost in the story and have it do its job of helping to tell the story without drawing attention to itself. So, it's an honor to be able to fool people, with the work rather than trying to dazzle people with it. So,
Well, that movie making is about the illusion, the illusion of things, and the actor provides an illusion. The costume design is another layer of that illusion. Computer graphics have taken over a large portion of this, but there's still an art form to that. But what you're really doing is creating part of the illusion. And matte paintings, I think in particular, create critical illusions at critical parts of the story that otherwise couldn't be done or filmed traditionally. And in fact, I will grab something here real quick. I'm going to share my screen real quick for the book you're talking about in case anyone's interested. This is the book that Eric's talking about. It's called The Invisible Art, Legends of the Movie Matte Painting by Mark Codevaz and Craig Barron, with a foreword by George Lucas himself, everybody.
Yeah, it's a great book. It has beautiful plates in it. And if anybody just likes old movies, there's some really great paintings in there from like old Hitchcock films and things. And it also has biographies of like the older generation of actual honest to God matte painters like Albert Whitlock and Matt Urisic and Peter Ellenshaw, these guys. I mean, these are my heroes as painters.
Isn't there a Harrison Ellenshaw as well?
Yeah, Harrison is Peter Ellenshaw's son.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I met Harrison actually one day. He came through ILM. That was the really cool thing about working at ILM back then. I met some really cool people that would just sort of float through the art department.
So I have to ask, just on behalf of anyone listening, because they're probably having the same questions. There's kind of a pretty well-known, I would argue, famous at this point, gang of artists that helped form ILM and were part of it. Did you ever meet Ralph McQuarrie? Never
met Ralph McQuarrie. No, I met Sid Mead.
What's that?
I met Sid Mead. He wasn't involved in Star Wars, but he was another industrial designer that did amazing work.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to imagine this sort of, you say, people passing through. There's Doug Chiang was another big famous concept artist.
Yeah, no, I knew Doug really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I have his book Robota, which it's funny. I think that came out before the prequels, and you could kind of see a little traces of the battle droids in some of the images.
Well, because he was sort of like he was like the Ralph McQuarrie of the prequels. He was the one that was assigned to come up with like production illustrations of like all the mechanical stuff. So Ian's group was involved in the biological stuff, the creatures and costumes, that sort of thing. But Doug was heading up like, weapons and vehicles and buildings and that kind of stuff. And I can remember asking him one time, because I'm the kind of painter that I can't make things up really well. I need to have a reference. I need to have something to look at and then use that to paint from. I remember asking Doug when he's doing these, because Robota has like these paintings he would do. They were just they were small. They were like this big because they were just like concept paintings, but they're just beautifully rendered. Yeah. I remember asking him. I said, "So, do you just make this up, or is it like formed in your head already, or are you using things to kind of give you inspiration?" He goes, "No, I just make it up. I just paint
the book right here."
Yeah, and it was just like. It was like that moment when Salieri, meets Mozart for the first time. It's like I'm just a schlub, doing what I can to try to make something that looks great in my case. And here's a guy who's just naturally gifted. He can just do it out of his head with effortlessly. And so,
oh wow!
You have to really admire
Mozart
that.
playing the piano.
Exactly. Doug's a much nicer guy than Mozart's depicted in that movie, though. So he wasn't arrogant or rude or anything.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite movies, by the way. It's a top
That's one of my
movie.
favorite too. And actually, my favorite is the theatrical version and not the Blu-ray version. That one really makes me angry. So.
It was fun to see the director's version once, like because you got to see all this extra footage of what and then they kind of like mothballed the theatrical version. So then you were stuck with this long-winded they just released last month the 4K of the theatrical version of Amadeus.
Oh, they did?
They did. It just came out.
Okay, well then I'm going to buy it because we've got the Blu-ray, but I never watch it because what made, in my opinion, Amadeus so great was the fact that the main character was somebody we can all relate to. We're all mediocre, it was nice to see a guy who was just trying his hardest to rise above it, but it's just he's being undercut by a guy who's just naturally gifted.
Oh yeah.
But in the director's cut, they made Salieri into an asshole. You know,
He's much worse.
And I want to identify with him. I don't want to hate the guy. And so I am glad that they finally came to their senses and released the theatrical version. It did win Best Picture after all. So.
It won a ton of things in 1984. I've had separate discussions just on that movie because I love it that much. But so getting back to your experience here meeting Doug Chiang, I got this great image in my head now of you being like, yeah, here's, and then he's just like, oh, you mean this, playing effortlessly.
Right.
But that's what it is. And I do still think that sometimes just being around an individual who has mastered a craft like that, some of that does rub off on you. And I think it shows you, other levels sometimes that are possible that maybe, you wouldn't have known if you had not met these individuals.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, so when I was back in graduate school, there was a book that came out on Industrial Light and Magic. I forgot the name of it. I got it on my bookshelf back there, but it was on ILM, and so that was my Bible when I was in graduate school. It was broken up into different sections. It was like the model shop and the map shop, and there, the optical printer department, and all this. And so, I would just absorb it because and they had these beautiful plates. There's even like fold outs, of some of the matte paintings, so you can really see them in detail.
Oh, wow.
And so again, that was my Bible. Well, you also get to know the players as well. And so it was so cool that, one year I'm reading about these guys in the book, and the next year I'm actually working with them,
Unbelievable.
So I not only know these guys, but I'm actually working on their shows, people like Ken Ralston and Dennis Murin and Scott Farrar and
Phil Tippett.
Tippett was already gone. He'd already created his own company, Tippett Studios, but he did come through the Matt department once. So I actually did get to meet him. I just never actually worked with him directly.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have watched the documentaries, I have read the books, and you just get the sense I get, and maybe you can kind of confirm or even elaborate on it, is, here's a group of craftsmen and artists who are at the top of their game. They're pushing the envelope, and it's go time, and it seemed like they're focused. It seems like it would be a dream to be around a group like that are innovative and focused.
Absolutely. I didn't leave ILM because I didn't like it. I left it because I wanted to buy a house and I couldn't afford to buy one in Marin. And so and since I was moonlighting and making a living at it, I just figured, okay, we'll move to where we can afford to buy a nice house. So we moved to Washington State, which is where we are now. And I figured if it didn't work out, I'll just get my job back at ILM. But 30 years later, I haven't had the need to do that. So,
wow.
But yeah, I loved working there. It was fantastic. And that's the one thing that I did miss by going off on my own, is just that camaraderie, because it was really cool, particularly back then, because like I said, we were like making it up as we went when everything went digital, because nobody had worked this way before. And so it was really fun to create ways of working that technically are like the grandfather of how people work today. We were just doing that out of necessity.
Well, and what's fascinating is I grew up, it sounds like you did too, grew up listening to, or, the big Star Wars phenomenon, the ILM phenomenon. It changed the landscape, right? These are the guys that came in from the outside and they recreated Hollywood in their own image. And so those stories have been told, and there's so much there, and they never get old to me. For the first time watching this documentary, the second season of Light and Magic, they're really starting to shine a light on the big revolution that went on. Some of the same guys right there at ILM, this transition to the digital world of storytelling, which suddenly I'm like, wow, this is like the second little golden age. I never thought of it like that.
And at the time, you don't realize that's what it is when you're in it.
Exactly.
So it is kind of, that was over 30 years ago. And it was just, again, for me, I wanted to be an actual painter. That was the thing. And unfortunately, I only worked traditionally for a year, and then it all went digital. So it's been kind of a double-edged sword for me. It was allowing me to be able to live and work from Washington State, which you couldn't really do if I actually had to be working with traditional media.
Right.
But it also meant not working that way. And that was what I really wanted to do, which we'll get into later. But that's why I'm doing these Byzantine paintings now. So, but yeah, that was sort of like the deal with the devil. You know, I can be able to make a living where I want to live and still work in the industry, but it just means I wasn't going to be working with actual physical media anymore.
Right. Well, and I have other friends who are artists, and there is always this like ancient tug of war between being able to do it by hand and only being able to do it digitally. And I feel like the guys that can do it by hand place a great premium on that because of the skill level that goes into it. And I even sensed out of my friend, one of my friends in particular, that there's a little resentment in the takeover of computers coming into the art world, where and also a sense that there might be part of the craft that is getting lost in the age of computers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I've got a little anecdote. So ILM, they moved to the Presidio several years ago, long after I'd already left working there. But I did go back and visit after moving up here just to, have lunch with friends of mine that still work there. And there was this optical printer that they had that was actual physical working machine at ILM when I was there on Hook. And I think they gave it a name. They usually give a lot of their, bespoke machinery that they make for things. They usually have a name. And this had a name, and it was like a really, really highly engineered piece of equipment. Well, when I went back to go visit them for lunch, I think it was in C building in the lobby. They had it in the lobby with like a rope in front of it, like a museum piece. And it was just really sad to see something that was a real workhorse that had been around for decades. Probably a lot of shots seen in very famous movies had elements that were created on this machine. And now it's just a dinosaur sitting in the lobby of this building. And that was really sad. And I think that's sort of the same thing with the skill sets. You spend your whole life developing these skills, and practically overnight, they're no longer needed. But that's true for a lot of different, people who made buggy whips, eventually.
Yeah.
So you just kind of have to go with the flow. And I wish I had more. I'm 61 years old, and I started working at ILM. I think I was 28, 29. That's because I had all that time that I spent in college before I got the opportunity to actually work in the industry. I really wish I'd had like a couple of year head start working in the industry and have been able to paint the old fashioned way for a couple of more years beforehand. That would have been really cool.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I got to be at the ground zero for a whole new way of working. And so, on the aggregate, looking at both of those, I probably was lucky and didn't realize it at the time. So,
yeah, I have a sense that there's going to be some more attention on that era. Because like you said, when you're in it, you're probably not thinking, oh my God, you're like, oh, how do I learn this program? You got to be practical and you got to do it. You're in midstream. Mm-hmm. I think in the age of AI, suddenly the age of just computers is even starting to now look like a different era. So it's like, suddenly you look back, like even when I was watching Revenge of the Sith at the theater, I was like, wow, this is a 20-year-old film, which is shocking to say. And two, it looks like it came from a different era now. And I love it. I love Revenge of the Sith. And I was like, so I feel like there's a sudden, our culture might be taking a look at the guys who were there on the vanguard of that computer revolution, because it seems like maybe we're standing right on the precipice of revolution of another one in with AI starting to invade.
Well, I've always looked at it this way. Working on a computer, it's a tool. It's not replacing someone. It's just demanding a different skill set. So when I first started working, we all came from the photochemical, world. And so even though we were using Photoshop, if it was more efficient to build a model, a physical model, go to a model shop and build a physical model of like a tank or something and photograph that, rather than just painting it from, by hand, or even trying to build it in the computer as an element. If it was quicker and easier just to get just kit bash something, that's what you do. And so I still do that today. There'll be a shot. I've done shots. I worked on Alias for a while, and there's shots I did on that where I actually I got an HO scale train. It was a shot where it was a train going down a railroad track at night. And so rather than building this big complicated train in the computer, I thought, well, I'll just get an HO scale train. And what I did is I shot it stop motion. But what I did is I marked the track. I put little lines on there for like every, I don't know, eighth of an inch. And then I did it as if it was like a motion control thing, only with a lock off camera. I did a beauty pass and I did a light pass. And what I did is I just took the camera, or I took the train, and I just moved it to the next demarcation on the track, stepped away, took a frame, then moved it again. But what I ended up doing is I had it move 4 times slower than the speed I wanted it in the shot, because I didn't have a way of being able to do motion blur. So what I ended up doing is I sped it up and then used a filter to do motion blur at the correct speed by using those extra frames that I shot. And it worked really well. And there's other times where I've actually just bought little fully fledged models of, there's a shot I did for Lost, where it was a little tank about this big that I, used in that, rather than trying to build it. And so, if it's all about expediency and trying to get the shot done on time with what they're willing to pay you to do it. And so even today, if it's makes more sense to do it old school, that's the way I'll do it.
See, that's great. I actually passed by, I forgot where I was at Hobby Lobby, and I passed by this whole section of models, and I was like, man, who's doing this anymore? I used to build models when I was a kid. You paint them, you have the decals and things, my dad and I. But I was like, I wonder, are the next gen? So it made me think that what I need to do is buy some models and have my kids sit down and try to build one with me. It's just hard to compete for that with that attention span,
Well, but when you're talking about AI, we really are kind of going into a new phase. And so to me, I didn't feel, obviously I wanted to be able to still utilize my painting skills when everything went digital. But it wasn't like you hit a button and the computer can suddenly do the shot. You still had to have artistry involved in creating a shot. Now with AI, that's a whole different ballgame. And so AI should be used as a tool when necessary, just like anything should be used as a tool. But I think there's going to be a real temptation to just have AI just do it.
Yeah, you said something very important. You said, these are tools. At the time, the transition from real models to computer-aided models, and now from computers to AI, I think you're exactly right. These are tools, because there is no real way to just push a button. Because when you start to get to the professional level, you can't just say design, mushroom planet, and that you're going to have to get in there and make some practical changes. And my experience with AI has been, you have an idea, and the AI is amazing because it'll create 90% of what you're thinking, or but man, it never gets to 100. You will sit there for hours messing with this thing to get it to 93% of what you're imagining, or 94. So it'll get you really close. But it's hard to cross that final little final.
Well, but there's a YouTube channel I like watching called I just forgot the name of it. I just watched an episode yesterday. But anyway, he did an episode on AI, and he said something at the end that's like, wow, that's really true. The state of AI right now, this is the worst it will ever be.
Yeah.
It's only going to get better.
Yep.
When you're talking about getting it to 93%, well, give it another year or two, and then it'll be like getting it to 98% is what you do to input. And then eventually it'll just do it. But here's the thing. AI doesn't know what the hell it's doing.
Correct.
It's just simply predicting what it thinks is the next logical thing. Or in the case of an image, you give it prompts, and it has a built-in database of what something should look like, and then it creates a noise field, and then it just like keeps refining that noise field until it comes up with an image. But it doesn't know what it's doing. It's intelligent up to what it was trained to be intelligent in. But if it creates a image that's really cool looking, it doesn't know. And so it's kind of a misnomer to say I'll just let AI do it because it doesn't know what
Right.
it's doing. And so one of the things I'm kind of curious about is when I see comic books that are done with AI, how they can be able to have the same character, but like from a different camera angle. So
Well, I
it's
guess
not
that's a new thing they're doing with AI is, in fact, the one that I use to mess around with images, it's called Story Gen. So what they're trying to do is create AI that remembers some things
okay. Okay.
and then you continue to use it. So, and I haven't messed with that stuff yet, but that seems to be where it's going because I've run into that problem too. You're like, oh man, I made this great image, but now I want it to change, and it's
Well,
gonna be
the one good thing about AI in terms of the TV and movie industry, that's sort of a saving grace, is not a technical one. It's a legal one, and
right,
that is you can't copyright AI generated material
right.
because it
That's
has to
right,
be generated by a human being. So studios don't want to
right.
have somebody have AI create some cool character because that's lost toy revenue.
Right. Well,
They don't
so
want
it
to have
seems valuable for concepts, right, and not for final products.
right. And so that's the thing. So you still have to have a human being involved in the final thing, regardless of how good it looks coming out of AI, just because they don't want to give up the copyright to it.
Right.
And that's probably going to be the same for even if AI is used to like generate scripts, that it's still going to have a human being put their final imprimatur on it. Otherwise, they can't lay claim to it at all.
That's right. Yeah.
So
I still think that you're going to need a human element for the higher level creative aspects because as the value of an image goes down because everyone's making images, right? What I'm thinking is going to happen is, well, you're still going to have to compete in this sea of images, and
well,
so
but here's the other thing is that I don't know what the exact number is, but there is so much AI sludge on the internet already. And
yeah,
the problem is that it's using that sludge as part of its models. So it's like making a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. It's just going to get worse because its training material is stuff that was already
man, that's a
artificially
great
created
point.
to begin with.
I have
So
not heard that yet, but that's a great point.
so I don't know. Obviously, that's a problem they're going to have to deal with if they want AI to actually be something meaningful. Because with I haven't used AI in anything that I've done commercially, but and when we get more into talking about the paintings, I can talk about my process. But there's a painting that I'm designing right now where I wanted to be able to have a Byzantine lantern in it, like a chandelier.
Mm,
And so I looked on the internet to see if I could just find some actual real ones, things that were unearthed and are in museums, but I couldn't find anything that I really liked. And so I thought, well, let me try this AI thing.
yeah,
And so I went on to the image generator on ChatGPT and just typed in a prompt, and it gave me a few things, but it gave me one that was like, yeah, this actually looks pretty good.
yeah.
So the way I work is that I build 3D models of elements and I render them, and I use those as my reference for when I do my paintings. But the thing is that when it generated that, and I've noticed this on a lot of AI stuff, and it's like what you're talking about, is that it's something that looks cool at first blush, but when you look at it in more
Yeah.
detail, it's like it doesn't make any sense at all.
Totally.
And so when I was building a model of this thing, it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's just no way that could actually physically work that way. So you have to make a lot of fixes just to make it into an actual practical object.
Functionality, right? Yeah, I've done that too. Like you said, it's a tool. I've used AI to help me envision entire sets.
Right.
In the Constantinople in the 6th century. Like
Yeah.
what does the women's quarters look like? So I'll type it, and like you said, it'll 90% of them. I'm like, no. But then you'll get the one. You're like, oh, now that's interesting. That I might be able to work with. But all it's really doing is helping me expand somewhere, and then like you said, at the end of it you're going to be doing all the heavy lifting. So
Right.
it's a tool. It's helpful, and it's going to get better, but I think ultimately you still need an artistic mind. You have to have an artistic mind just to think of the command prompts to put in there.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's the part of this whole thing that I really hate. So I'm a visual guy, and so I don't want to have my skill set being knowing what the perfect keywords are to get the image that I want. And so I'm sure there's going to be websites that will be dedicated to doing just that.
Well,
you tell them what they want, what you want, and they know exactly how to work the ref to get the image that you want, while you happen to sit there and iterate to finally getting what you want.
I've literally used like Chat GPT to generate. I'm like, give me a list of keywords that will help me with visual. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, I've tried that, and so it spit out some things that have been useful. Anyway, so while I've got you. By the way, and this is fascinating conversation, especially with an artist such as yourself, a high-level professional. I think people are curious about the uncertainty that AI presents, and so it's very interesting and compelling to hear your thoughts on it. But I am happy to hear you say that you believe it is ultimately a tool, and at the end of the day, you're still going to need human beings to make those final decisions and to be able to do things that are the most unexpected, the most dynamic. And the more you have to compete against AI images, it's going to take a human being to find that edge, to do something unexpected that's going to make someone go, "Oh, wow, there's a person behind that one." We've already developed an eye for AI. We're like, "Oh, that's AI. I could tell."
Yeah, the problem though is that it's still a shiny new toy for the moneyed people, the people that actually spend money on productions and things. And so, this sort of same thing happened during the digital age as well. Was that there'd almost be a mandate? Oh, you got to use these digital tools because they're cool and cutting edge, and we were told that it'll save us money. So rather than using the appropriate tool for the job at hand, it was sort of like dictated. It's like, oh, you got to use this. Now, that didn't happen to me specifically, but I've got colleagues that have been in that situation. It's like you're not being left to use what is the most appropriate approach to creating a shot. And like I mentioned earlier, it's like sometimes you just build a little physical model and photograph it, and that works really well.
See, I love that. But you have to have the model making capacity for that option to be on the table. So.
Right. But I think now in the AI world, now we're back to that. Oh, we got to use AI because that's what's new and cutting edge, and we were told it's going to save us money. So it's that same argument. But I think eventually the dust will settle, and it'll hopefully be utilized for what it's good at and not being utilized for evil.
Right.
But even before AI, we still had the ability of being able to create false narratives with like Photoshop. Used to be if you saw something, that was gospel. But after, Photoshop, it's like you can manipulate things to not be what you believe. And now it's just been accelerated with AI being able to create whole cloth video of people doing things that they never did. Right. And just like they can do that with voices and everything else. So I think what's going to happen is that you're going to have AI, at least in the production world, be used as a tool, but it's going to be outpaced by all the people who want to use it for malicious purposes. So it's like there isn't a technology that doesn't have a dark side.
Oh, totally.
I can give you a dark side for even like the invention of the wheel or the hammer. People are always going to find some way of using it for things other than good. Yeah, and the same thing with AI, and we just don't know what that fallout is going to be yet.
But so we have to get. I want to get back to some of this story here. So we're in the mid to late '90s, right? And this revolution is taking place. You're seeing the digitization of these art departments and the practical effects part of the studios. And sometime in the mid to late '90s, George Lucas got the idea that he wanted to go back to his original trilogy, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and he was going to make some adjustments. And he was going to create what he ended up calling the special edition of the original trilogy. And I remember how contentious this was when it came out. It did a couple of things. One, it angered some fans because you're messing with the classics here to create a special edition. But what it also did was it revitalized interest in Star Wars, because I remember all the stuff in the movie theaters, all the posters talking about the special edition. I remember the commercials, and a few new surprises, and they'd show you one clip that you never seen before, which also generated then the hype was already laid. The hype was already there for when the prequels was about to come out. So I see this as like, the special edition is this midway step between the original trilogy and what would become the prequels. And I think the hype train really got started with these special editions. And now Eric, you were involved with the special editions. Is that right?
Yeah, I did one shot in New Hope, or is that what's called, a New Hope? Yeah, the first Star Wars. When I was a kid, it was called Star Wars.
Right, totally.
um, but yeah, I did one shot in that, and it's only on screen for like 1 second. And then, but most of the thing, and I did one shot that was at the very end of the third movie, Return of the Jedi. Most of the ones that I did were in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so really what it was, so George he was limited by budget and time when he made the films originally. And so he always wanted to give it more production value than he could afford at the time. And so that was the rationale for doing all these things in the re-release. Now, full disclosure here, I prefer the original versions. I like the versions that I saw when I was a kid. So yeah, I worked on the re-release, but if given a choice, I'd rather have a Blu-ray of the original releases that came out in the 70s and early 80s. I don't think they add anything personally, but I'm the kind of person that my favorite movie is Jaws.
Oh, great movie.
And the things that I like about that movie, not only just, I think it's just a really well-told story, and I love the dynamic between the characters, but I also like the fact that the extras in the background aren't actors. And when they do have a speaking part, you can tell they're not actors. They're like real local people. I think that's endearing. I love that. Yeah. And so if a movie's good, it doesn't matter about that kind of stuff. It's part of what makes the movie so great. And so when you take something that's a cultural phenomenon, like the original 3 Star Wars movies, and think, you know what, I'm going to monkey around with it and make it better to suit what I thought was going to make it better, you're playing with culture now. And I don't think yes, technically it's George's, he can do whatever the hell he wants with it, but it belongs to us now. It's part of our culture. And so when you do that, to me, it's like colorizing an old movie. Right. It's not the same experience.
Yeah, and what the movie meant at the time it came out and how it was experienced at the time it came out is what created the cultural phenomenon. And I agree with you in that we're part of the equation too. It can't be a cultural phenomenon without us, the fans. So, we're the other side of the equation. And we loved those movies when they came out the way they came out. And what's funny is A New Hope was the first movie I had been taken to. I was 18 months old in 1977, and my dad took me to see it. He wanted to see it, and he's like, "What am I going to do with my infant son? He's coming with." But I can say that the first movie I ever was in was A New Hope, and I actually, some of my earliest memories are seeing Empire Strikes Back. I remember seeing it, and the experience as I was about 4 years old, but those elephantine walkers, man, the AT-ATs coming at you, and this huge snowfield, and blasters didn't work on it, and here's the guy that blew up the Death Star. Now he can't take this thing down because the armor's too strong for, those images, you just can't get them out of your head. So, but you worked on, what were some of the new matte paintings that were needed for the special edition?
Well, like I said, most of the work that I did was on the Empire Strikes Back, and it was all the shots that took place in Cloud City. So originally when they're running down the hallway, it was just a hallway, but they wanted to open it up so you can actually see Cloud City. So a lot of shots I did were adding windows to those hallways and then just creating a background of, the big floaty buildings in the background.
Oh yeah. Those were really good sets. I do have two minds of this. I'm with you in that the original needs to be preserved. At the very least, they should be available.
Yeah, exactly.
They have to be available for the people who want to watch those. The special editions have grown on me, and the original sets for Cloud City were pretty confining. So there was some value, I think, in opening it up a little bit.
Yeah,
so you were part of that.
It was work for me, so I don't mind. But so I did that. The shot I did for A New Hope was a shot where I think it's Han Solo, and I don't know, it's like the group, they're running through the Death Star, and the big hatch opens, and they're standing there, and it's a reverse angle where it's like you see like some stormtroopers, but they wanted to make it look like there was like hundreds of stormtroopers in
the exact shot.
Yeah, so I did that shot, but it's on screen for literally like less than a second. And so
I know, but it's funny because that shot, the comedy of the shot is augmented because instead of the stormtroopers, they run into like a legion of stormtroopers.
Right, exactly.
Isn't there like a TIE fighter in the background?
Yeah, exactly. It's like hanging in the air in the background. Yeah.
Oh, that was you.
And then at the last, there's like a montage sequence at the end of Return of the Jedi where like the whole universe is celebrating, the good times are back.
Right.
And there's a shot where it's like a panning shot. I think it is the Cloud City, I think, where it pans and you see all these big kind of circular buildings. And there's people down on this plaza that are cheering. And so I did that shot. I didn't design it. That was actually designed by Doug Chang. He did the artwork for it, but I built it in 3D and rented it out. I probably shouldn't bring this up, but I've got a little dirt on that shot, but I don't want to step on any toes. So
okay,
I probably shouldn't mention anything. But anyway, so that and I only did that one shot in the last in the third movie.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, any work that's done in the Star Wars arena, I mean, that's like epic level contributions, at this point. And, I would say for a whole new generation, that the special editions is really how they know Star Wars. I would say the millennial generation, who weren't around when the trilogy came out, but were there for the hype of the special editions, were there for the hype of the prequels. So, you have contributed directly to those experiences, even if we prefer the originals.
Yeah, well, no, it's I'm part of a little, I guess, brotherhood now with me and tens of thousands of other people at this point. But yeah, no, it's cool. I normally don't bring it up, but I guess it is kind of cool to say I worked on a Star Wars film just for the sake of saying it. But
yeah,
it's been kind of a curse though, in the sense that. So I worked on those over 25 years ago. I still get like autograph requests in the mail. People will send me these Star Wars trading cards, and it's like they'll, not just to me, but they'll send them to anybody that they know that worked on any of the Star Wars film in any capacity. They have these trading cards and they collect autographs of people that worked on the shows. And so a year goes by. There's not a year that has gone by where I haven't gotten at least one or two of those during the year. And I don't mind doing it. I mean, it's an honor that but it's like I did such a little bit of tiny thing on a really old film compared to like, now Disney owns Star Wars and there's some Star Wars property comes out practically every other month. So, and I must say, I don't get those requests as often as I do, but I still get them, which I think is kind of funny. But
yeah, well, I think, like you said, there is, now that you say it, a brotherhood of the people that came together to make those original films, and then what they did to the world, the industry, and then how it's expanded, and I think it's different since Disney has bought it, but at the same time, being able to have contributed to Star Wars is something special, and it's not the same as really anything else. I don't even know what else to compare it to, maybe, but that is special. So you worked on the Star Wars special editions, became part of the Brotherhood, or the crew. Mm-hmm. And it looks like on your IMDb you've been busy well through after the 90s all the way up to the current day. Are there any?
You can't really rely on IMDb because I'm not real good about updating that, with accurate information. So what is there is actually just the IMDb bots, just looking at the few times my names have been in credits and showing them. Oh. But just off the top of my head, I've worked on over 30 feature films and probably as many television shows over the years. I mostly work in television. So I've done, I'm sure at this point I've done tens of thousands of different shots over the years.
Wow. Well, but television has elevated its position,
yeah.
I think right around the time of Lost, when the Lost show came out, that kind of sparked a new era for TV, where TV suddenly was bigger budget, higher production value, long form storytelling, multiple seasons. Like it got to be pretty wild. And like you said, I can't rely on IMDb, but I did notice there Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, I think Alias, you said Lost, Star Trek Voyager. I mean, those are some pretty huge shows. Babylon 5 is a big one. That was one of the early shows that used computer-aided graphics
Yeah.
In their opening sequence.
Yeah, that was most of that. All the 3D stuff was done by a company called Foundation Imaging, and that was run by a guy named Ron Thornton, and really nice guy. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but yeah, Ron was. I didn't work with Ron directly because I was in the Bay Area and they were down in Los Angeles, but I did. There's times when I would be on set where I would just stop by their place and see what they were working on. They were working at the time. They were working on. I think when they first started working on Babylon 5, they were working on toasters, video toasters, using Lightwave. And so once Lightwave was ported to PCs, then they switched over to that. But all the 3D work on that show was done in Lightwave. And,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, that was like probably one of the more high profile things that Lightwave was being used for at the time. But yeah, and so see what you're talking about.
Some of the TV shows, Better Call Saul.
Oh, right. Yeah. So I've got an interesting story about Lost and Alias if you want to hear it. So
yeah.
Okay. So in 2001, there was a guy who had contacted Ian. I don't know exactly how that happened, but there's a fellow that lived in Santa Barbara, and he wrote a script for a short subject film, and it was a comedy. And it was very funny. And I think it was called Taking the Wheel. And he was able to convince John Cleese to be in this short film. And so having Cleese be a part of this project, he was able to get other people to just sign me up because we want to work with John Cleese, right? From Monty Python.
Yeah.
So I had been down there on set when they were shooting, and so it was really cool to meet and work with John Cleese because he was always my favorite of the Pythons. He was just
man,
I've always liked him, and I love Fawlty Towers. So it was just kind of cool to be on set with John Cleese, and he was just a super nice guy and just very very easy to work with. But there was another fellow that was on set who. I don't know if he actually worked on the show, but he was based in Santa Barbara, and he actually had a karate studio. But he and another fellow that was a friend of his, they had made a Star Wars fan film called Duality, and they did it all in Electric Image.
Okay.
And so this other guy who I never actually met in person, but it was this guy's partner when they made this film. He made his living designing fonts, text fonts.
Yeah.
And so when J.J. Abrams was writing the script for Alias, he wanted it to be like an old-timey typewriter font for the script. And so he found this guy and saw that he made this film Duality and loved it. And so he asked if he wanted to work on this new TV show he was doing called Alias. Well, this guy says, well, I'm not really a supervisor. I'm not really an effects guy. He says, but I know of another guy that worked on this film here locally that you might want to contact to see if he would be interested in working on your show. So he asked JJ to get a hold of me, and they had my email address. So JJ emailed me and said, hey, I'm doing the show, and I heard that you might be interested in working on it. And so I wrote him back saying, well, I live and work in Washington State. I said, but if you want somebody on set to be a supervisor, I can recommend some people. So I had 3 people that I worked with regularly back then. And he interviewed all 3 of them and he ended up hiring one of them.
Oh, wow.
And so that's how I ended up working on Alias, which led to working on Lost, which led to working on the other bad robot shows after that. So all because of this serendipitous thing, working on this basically student film in Santa Barbara that eventually led to me working on Lost and Alias. It's just crazy how life works.
Yeah, that is not what you would expect, how you would expect it to go, that doing something almost like an indie project, really, and then it leading to some pretty big, because, we have to put ourselves back into the mind frame of the Lost was a huge show. I mean, this like broke the mold for what television could do. It was like right on the cut, and then Game of Thrones came on, and then there was Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and suddenly TV was like where the action was. So,
well, Lost and Alias were great because they were great matte painting shows. I mean, the whole point was that it took place all over the world, but they shot it, in the case of Alias, they shot in Los Angeles, and with Lost, they shot in Honolulu.
Right.
And so they needed matte paintings to be able to tell the story when they did these flashbacks or flash forwards or flash sideways. If it was Berlin or London, those were shots that I did.
Wow.
And so it was really fun to be, the person responsible for bringing that production value to the show.
Wow. And so how long does it take, let's say a stand, and I know there's probably a lot of variables here, but one large set piece matte painting, let's say for a show like Alias, how long would that take for you to paint?
Well, it depends on a few factors. One is just how complex the shot is, but also, how much time is there to do it? Because sometimes the schedule, particularly when you get to the end of a season, it can be really compressed. And so I've done shots that have taken me an hour, and I've worked on shots that have taken me 6 months.
Ooh, so wow, that's a range.
Yes. So it just depends on what the imagery is.
Okay. Yeah, and I had a sense there'd probably be some variables there. But yeah, some of those shots are ultra complex. I was looking through various matte paintings in the Star Wars films. I was like, man, this one looks like it took a while. and how big are they?
Well, you mean physical paintings?
Yeah, so it's a piece of glass. Like, where do you get all the material? Where do you buy a piece of glass? Like, how does this work?
Well, when I was at ILM, they had a particular size they worked on. They generally were 6 feet wide, and then depending on what the aspect ratio of the show was, would depend on how tall it was. So if it was a 2-3-5 show, if it was something that was anamorphic, then it was, I don't know, maybe 2.5, 3 feet tall. But if it was something that was in 166 or 185, then it would be taller because it's more of a square aspect ratio. And they're heavy, they're like, it's like lugging a shower door around, they're pretty heavy.
Yeah, glass gets pretty heavy. And then what happens to these after the show is done? Are they auctioned off? Do you autograph them?
So that's kind of an interesting story. So the very first thing I did when I was working at ILM as a assistant was, so normally what happens is that whenever there's a model or a painting or anything that's built as an artifact to create a shot, the studio who's paying the bills, they don't normally care about that. They just want the shot. That's what
right.
If it needs to be created to create the shot, they don't care. So a lot of the painting, unless it was like a Lucasfilm thing, because he has a whole library full of things related to Lucasfilm. but generally they would just be there at ILM in a rack. You just pull it like, oh, that's from Ghostbusters, and you pull another one out. Oh, that's from another show. And so it's kind of cool to have this rack of old paintings you can look at and go, oh, that's what that looks like in person. That's kind of cool.
Wow. And is that available to the public somewhere? Or is that
no, this was just, in the mat room. They just had them, in a rack off in the corner of the room.
Wow.
And again, this is from 35 years ago, but when the first thing I worked on when I was there, they had just finished working on The Rocketeer, which was a Disney produced show.
Yes.
And the two guys who mostly worked on that were Mark Sullivan and Yusei Wesky, who I worked with. I worked with both of them on Hook, and then when I came back to work on Young Indy, Mark had already left to work for himself, but Yusei was still there. And Yusei is this brilliant guy who came from Japan in the mid '80s, didn't speak a word of English, and but he was like this, not just a fantastic painter, but just a fantastic visual effects guy. He made his own optical printer for Super 8. Super 8 optical printer. He just, it was like something that he had taken a tin can. I mean, it was something that was really homemade, but it worked. And so so part of his demo reel to get work in LA was showing not only the shots that he made using this optical printer, but he brought it along. It was only like this big. It was tiny. And so this guy was just brilliant. And so I learned so many things from Yusei because he was just so inventive and creative and just unbelievable. So I got to work with him the whole time I was at ILM.
Wow.
An amazing guy. Okay, so they did these really great paintings for The Rocketeer. It was a lot of like LA at night skyline kind of stuff. And but since Disney at the time had their own visual effects department, Disney had wanted those paintings. It's like, hey, we paid for them, we want them. And so they belonged to Disney. So my first job when I was there, before I actually was working on Hook, was I had to they had these ILM stickers that they wanted me to put on the painting in the lower right corner and then put varnish over it. So that way they couldn't peel the sticker off, because they didn't want them hanging on the walls at Disney, so that when they were bidding on work, people would see the Rocketeer stuff and they'd say, oh yes, we did this for Rocketeer, when actually ILM did it. So it's kind of like putting our signature on it.
Yeah,
that was my first job at ILM, was doing that. So to answer your question, they technically belong to the client, but rarely do they ever ask for them. I mean, now, because they're rare, absolutely. But back then it was just, it's just an artifact.
Yeah, I have a feeling those will become more valuable as time goes by, because
absolutely, yeah,
those are physical pieces of art, and I have a feeling that the value of that is just going to go through the roof. I mean, it probably already has, but it's just going to keep getting more and more valuable. You know, it's like, see, I remember the first time I saw the ruby slippers for Wizard of Oz. They were behind glass, and I remember I was like, oh my God, the ruby slippers from like Wizard of Oz, that's amazing. Like, they're right there. So, you know, a matte painting. I remember watching a documentary recently, and they found this matte painting from the movie Clue. The big mansion shot was a matte painting, and they found it like, it was like in some like storage facility that guy had. And I was like, that piece of like movie history is like just in a warehouse, forgotten somewhere.
Well, so I got another good story for you. So I mentioned earlier Matt Urasich, who was one of the older generation of matte painters. He worked on a lot of things, but specifically he worked on Ben-Hur, and he worked on North by Northwest. Later in life, he worked on there's a shot he did for Field of Dreams. He got an Oscar actually for Logan's Run.
Man.
So he had a real long career. Well, when after I had finished at ILM on Hook, I'd gone back down to Southern California, and I was trying to find work. One of the guys they brought up to work on Hook, because it was a big matte painting show, was a fellow named Rocco Joffrey. And he normally worked at his own facility in Santa Monica. But they brought him up to work on Hook because we needed the extra people. And so after the show wrapped, he went back down there, but I got to know him, I worked with him. And so when I went back down to Southern California, I looked him up and to see if he could help me find work, in LA as a matte painter. This is when everything was still done the old fashioned way. So I'd stop by his shop, and there's this older fellow working on this big painting. And he's painting away. He's got his back to me because I came in through a door. It was behind where he was facing when he was working on this painting. And he had a cigarette kind of bogarting out of his mouth. And so he says, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I was just looking for Rocco. And he goes, oh yeah, he went out to go run an errand, but he'll be back. And he says, I'm Matt. And I said, Matt Urasich? And he says, yeah. And it was just like, suddenly it's like meeting a rock star for me. It's just like, holy crap, I know who you are.
Wow.
So that was just really exciting. And Sven, he was like, he was just, doing his thing, painting. So this was back in end of 91, maybe somewhere in 92. Well, fast forward to about the year 2000. I've already moved up here. I'd already spent my second 3 years at ILM, but now I'm established up here in Washington. And I used to when I was at ILM, I used to regularly go to this convention called SIGGRAPH. ILM would pay for us to go to SIGGRAPH, and that was like a computer graphics convention. It was where you see all the latest software and hardware and all that kind of stuff. And when I moved up here to Washington, I kind of kept that up for a few years, and then finally just kind of lost interest in doing it. But there was one time it was in LA. And so while I was down there, I thought I'd have lunch with Rocco. At that time, he was working at another facility temporarily, and I was catching up with him. I'd talked to him in a while. And so we're out having lunch, and he says, so where do you live? And I said, well, I live about a half hour, or I live about an hour north of Seattle, just south of a town called Bellingham. And he goes, Bellingham, I think Matt Urasich lives there now. And I said, no, there's no way. I said, I thought because he retired, I thought he'd moved to Henderson, Nevada. He goes, well, he did, but he had a stroke, and his daughter lives in Bellingham. So he moved up there so that his daughter could help, keep an eye on him. So he gave me his phone number, and sure enough, he did live in Bellingham. He lived like 20 minutes from me.
What?
So I was able to reintroduce myself. We became really good friends. He lived here. he lived here, I think, until about 2010. And then, so we would go out and have lunch and, just do stuff together. And he'd, tell old stories about, his days in the business. And, but he was just a really good friend, and he was just so easygoing and great to be around. And he ended up moving back down to LA to go to the motion picture home. It was a retirement home. And he eventually died there, I think in 2012.
Wow.
But it was just really cool to be able to work with somebody that I just, had idolized this whole time. So,
Wow.
So I'm giving you that whole story to tell you this story. So
Yeah.
there's another couple that live up here in the area that I live in. That the fellow, he and his wife both worked in the industry. He stopped when they moved up here. She continues to work as a editor, but he used to be a machinist, I think, at Sony. And so when he was working at Sony, he happened to notice that there was like these old matte paintings that were in a dumpster. And so he liked them. He thought they were cool. So he pulled one out and saved it. And so one day when I'd gone to their house, because I got introduced to them through a mutual friend, and I saw this painting, and I said, "Wow, that's really cool." I said, "Do you know what show it's from?" Because I have no idea. I said, "I just found it in the dumpster at Sony and really liked it." So I was kind of, I thought it had to be for a TV show because it was in a 1:3:3 aspect ratio. So it wouldn't be theatrical. It'd have to be something for television. And it was like the front of like a plantation, it had like a dirt road with like chariot ruts in the mud. And there was like the front of the house with the pillars, but there's an opening cut out in the middle for like where the plate element would go.
Right.
And so I just kind of had that filed away in the back of my head. Well, I ended up, there was I don't remember the name of the website, but there was a website dedicated to, it wasn't necessarily on Matt Urasich specifically, but there's a whole section dedicated to just him and his background and his work. And I was just looking at it because it's kind of fun just to, find out more things about him. And they had these images that were part of the article that would scroll up as you're reading the article.
Right.
And there was that painting. The painting that my friend had in his house. I was like, holy crap, Matt painted that.
Oh my God.
And so it turned out it was one that he painted. There was a movie that came out in the early 80s called Under the Rainbow. And I think it was Chevy Chase was in it. And it was about the making of The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And there's a scene. So not only was that painting used in that film, it was actually a prop in that film because there's a shot where it was supposed to be the front of Tara from Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind.
And so there was a sight gag where we're looking at Scarlett O'Hara standing at the door of Tara, and all of a sudden you see like this eye come in where the hole is in the painting, where in the background is the set that they built of Tara, and it's somebody looking through the matte painting, and you hear the director cut, and then they cut, and you see that it's a physical painting there on set, which is how they used to do them back in the old days. They actually had matte paintings that were shot at the same time as the plate. They actually, the artist painted the painting on location.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So this was sort of an homage to the old way. So Matt had done this painting for that movie that not only was a matte painting, but it was a prop in the film. And so I had a little party at my house and had Matt came and then these folks had come out, and so Matt actually signed the painting for them.
Oh,
which
my
I'm sure they
goodness.
absolutely cherish now. So again, just one of these serendipitous things where you get these two different, completely separate things happen that come together, and it was pretty neat.
Oh, wow. That is fascinating. And unbelievable that it would be that level of a person who had painted it. And,
Yeah.
now it makes you wonder what was thrown away in that Sony lot.
There's probably thousands of paintings that either were thrown away, or because the glass was very valuable, they just scraped the painting off the glass to reuse for another painting.
Oh, that pains me to think about.
Yeah.
And what happens, these things, it's funny when you get to see some of these things, you realize how, there's this like liminal space in Hollywood, like behind the stage of a theater where all this stuff just collects and people forget about it. And you get a generation comes in, they don't know what that is. And like someone painted on glass and they're going to throw it away, and they're throwing away these valuable pieces of art or props. So that's astounding. But at least that one piece was saved, you know.
Absolutely.
Do you have any advice to aspiring artists in the age of AI and computers everywhere?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that if they want to be a professional artist, or even a visual effects artist at this point, because I don't know how my job is going to change with AI. Um, it's very in flux right now, not necessarily because of AI specifically, but because of fallout from the Hollywood strikes a couple of years ago.
I heard they're going to strike again. The writers are thinking about striking again.
Again, even though they just got a deal 2 years ago.
And it was a bad deal. I know some guys that work out there, and man, they're not happy with the way it worked out. They lost work. The work is down like 40% for writers.
Well, the thing is, it's not just them; it's everybody. Hollywood is a ghost town right now, and so I don't really know what the answer is. What the studios learned from the strikes was, you know what? We don't actually have to crank out original content as aggressively as we had before. We got plenty already. and well, really, that's true. And so, they're still making stuff, but not nearly as much. The original idea, at least recently, was they needed to have content to promote these streaming services because everybody wanted to have their own streaming services. Well, it turned out those are very expensive. And so all the money that they burned through for that, they didn't quite get the return that they were expecting. And so now there's not the incentive to crank out so much material. They can just go back to their old libraries and make those available, and people will watch them.
And people are watching. If you go to the Nielsen ratings, a lot of older shows are charting.
Exactly. So there's not an incentive to make new stuff at the speed and scale they were before. So if the writers want to strike again, I'm not sure what they're going to be able to get in demands, because right now the studios kind of hold all the cards.
Yeah, I think that would be, I mean, it was pretty ill-advised because right after COVID, when the industry was trying to heal, is when the strikes hit, and it was just terribly timed. And if you talk to writers, their work level went down, not up, and the strikes seemed to exacerbate the slowdown like you're talking about. So yeah, the industry's in flux, but I do believe there are some timeless things about the artistic process, and you obviously have placed a premium on the plausibility and the effect that your art has when you paint. So is there anything you'd like to speak to maybe on those levels?
Well, I mean, obviously not just painting, but any form of creativity. If it's something that you love, that's half the battle right there. Whether it's learning to play the piano or, even, being skillful at, some other creative outlet, maybe it's wood carving or something. I don't know. But if you love to do it, that's half the battle, because you're willing to spend the time needed to be good at it. If you don't love it, then you're not. So if you're somebody who wants to be a painter, in this day and age, don't think you're going to do it to become the next Jeff Koons, because that's not going to happen. But if you do it because you love it and you want to improve your skills, and you just simply want to, for me, I paint the way I do to challenge myself. I when I started these paintings, two things I didn't know: one, they were going to take as long as they have to complete, and two, that they would be as complex as they turned out to be. And so when I start, like I said, I design everything on the computer, and so I know what I'm going to paint before I start. And my first thought is, how the hell am I going to do that? But you just break it down into small chunks. And so for me, the way I work is I just break it down into small chunks, and I've got little goals I try to meet every day, and eventually you get to the end.
Eventually you get to the end. I think that's a key.
But again, so for somebody who wants to get into painting, it's got to be something that you're doing because it's something you love. And hopefully, and this works for a lot of people, if it's something you love, it's something other people will love, and they will reward you for it. It won't happen overnight. I'm still waiting for people to discover me.
Right.
And it may not even happen in my lifetime, but at least I know I've left a collection of work that I'm proud of behind, that if it doesn't get thrown in a landfill, will hopefully end up, someplace where other people will be able to see it firsthand and enjoy it. And that's how you live forever, is by leaving something behind that other people can see that you created.
Yeah. And you've inspired me. Like I said, I've looked at your art, and it's helped me see. And by the way, I'm not just some guy who decided to look into, I've been studying this and thinking about this and trying to get it right in my head for decades, since the 90s, since 1992, when I first grabbed that book. So when I'm looking at your art and I'm seeing really fully realized scenes that are really well thought out and beautiful to look at with that level of detail, like, you're showing me something I've never seen before. And I feel like I've spent quite a bit of time, thinking about these kinds of places. So, and probably you will if ever you read the follow-up books, you'll see traces. You're like, I bet that was from looking at my paintings.
and I would be super stoked to know that I had a hand in that. Because like I said, I loved your first book. I thought it was fantastic. So for the people that kind of relating to what you're saying about at least the way that I work, if anybody wants to see how I work, I made a stop motion movie of me painting the Hippodrome painting. It's you can find the link on my website. So
okay.
it actually shows how because I work in a kind of an unusual way, but so you won't see me painting. You'll see the painting paint itself because it's stop motion. But I actually commissioned some original work for that as well. But
Wow.
it starts out looking like it's a educational film from the 1970s, just kind of a little background on me, but I made it look like it was from 50 years ago. No reason. I just thought it'd be fun.
The Hippodrome and you.
Yeah.
Like those little propaganda.
But if you click the link in my website, you can see if anybody wants to see how I actually work.
So what I will do is I will provide those links in the description below. If you're watching this, please click on those links and check them out. And also go to chauvinart.com. Consider purchasing a print and putting it in a frame and putting it on your wall. You'd be putting a true work of art up on your wall.
And the prints look amazing. They look really good. I work with a local printer that I supervised their production, and it looks really good. So if you get it full size, I mean the original size to the painting, you're getting a really good facsimile of what the real painting looks like.
What is the full size?
They're 27 by 40 inches. All of them are the same size.
Mr. Chauvin, we really appreciate all the time you spent kind of walking us through and describing what it's like to work in Hollywood, to be an artist, to be a matte painter, and then also to take the time to walk us through these tremendous paintings that you've given the world. So thank you. And is there anywhere else people can find you?
I guess Instagram and my website. That's pretty much the only social media I have. So if anybody wants to stop by and say hi, I'd appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Well, thanks again. And we'll be signing off and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Doug.